Trowbro back with another drawing with Trowbro. Today we're going to be looking at the artist Andy Warhol, and he's a very popular artist. See what I did there? Because he is what is known as a pop artist. Now, a pop artist takes things from their culture that are really popular and turns them into art. So take like a soup can maybe, a Campbell soup can. You go to Walmart, you go to Meijer, get a Campbell soup can, you pull it down, there's one right behind it. And you go to any store, it's just like this. They're mass produced. There's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of soup cans. But what Andy Warhol did was he would take a soup can, make a painting of it or a silk screening of it, and then he would make it unique and rare because there's only a few of his Campbell soup can, and that makes it super valuable. The price is really high. And so we're going to take that and we're going to turn it into a project for 2020. So I was thinking of something that's super popular like maybe YouTube, because everybody watches YouTube. And we're going to take the YouTube logo and turn it into pop art. So get your pencils ready and let's get started.
Okay, so before we get started, here on my right, my piece of paper is 9 inches by 12 inches. That means it's 12 inches wide and 9 inches tall. Now, if you are using normal copy paper that comes out of a printer, it is 8.5 by 11. And you won't be able to do what I'm doing because the YouTube logo that I printed out right over here that I'm going to show you here in a second, it is 9 squares by 12 squares. So if you do not have 9 inches by 12 inches piece of paper, which is construction paper, that's a normal size of construction paper, what you can do is you can trace your logo, all right? For example, here on my left, I have some printer paper. I have turned the brightness setting up all the way on my Chromebook. It's really hard to see right now with my camera, but once I put this piece of paper right on top of it, I want to center my logo, make sure it's as big as I can get it. I just kind of pinched and zoomed in. And then you cannot touch your screen. If you touch your screen, the bottom of your hand, it will click the logo, the picture on Google. So you gotta hold your hand up. It's a little awkward. You can even say some of my lines are not very straight, but that's okay. I'm just trying to get a basic drawing of the YouTube logo. So I'm being very careful, tracing all of the shapes that I see. And if you do move it at all, just try to line it back up, resize it, make sure it fits before you start drawing. So you can just draw your logo. This will save you a little bit of time. You won't have to like draw all the grid and stuff, but if you don't have 9 by 12 inch piece of paper, then copy paper is fine. This is a legitimate way to make art. Tracing has been used by artists for a long time. I think the best thing to do is, if you have the 12 by 9, is not to trace it. Even though tracing is good for you, it is better to test out your drawing skills and improve them by practicing, and drawing from a grid is super helpful for you to get proportions done. So if you have the 12 by 9 piece of paper, use that, don't trace it, all right? Draw the grid method. Use the grid method with me, all right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to post right here my logo with the grid on top of it, and what you're going to want to do is pause it on this, all right? Or you can kind of watch how I draw it and then come back to this picture right here that I'm posting so that you know how to draw it. So watch the video on how I do it and then come back to this picture right here and pause it, and then you start drawing it. Just referencing it. You have it on your left right here on the, or I have mine on the left, but you just have yours on the screen, and then you're just looking at one square at a time and drawing what you see. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Now, before I can start drawing my YouTube, what I need to do is make the grid. What I want to do is create a grid that's the exact same as the one on the left. So I'm using my ruler and I'm measuring. I'm making sure that the start of the ruler is at the start of the paper, and I'm putting a little lowercase l's at every inch. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You don't need to do one for the start of the paper or the end of the paper. So you should have 11 little marks. And I can do the same thing on the bottom. Come down, make sure my ruler lines up, and I'm going at little L's at 1, 2, 3, at 4, 5, and you're going to go all the way down to 11. You don't need to do 12, and you don't need to do 0, because that's the end of the paper. Okay, the end of the paper, that's already a line. So now I have a little line on the top and then a line on the bottom. And each one of these lines is 1 inch away from each other because we measured it. We used the ruler. And then I just go and I match up the dots. This is kind of like connect the dots, except they're lowercase l's. We're connecting the lowercase l's. One on the top, one on the bottom. And now I'm drawing these vertical parallel lines. And each one of them is 1 inch apart. Make sure you're using your ruler to measure the top and measure the bottom, and then make sure you're using your ruler to draw a straight line. Using a ruler is kind of like using a calculator on a math test, all right? It makes your math way easier if you had a calculator. The ruler is really helpful to drawing straight and parallel lines, all right? If you're not using the ruler, your lines aren't going to be straight, and they're not going to be parallel, and your grid won't look like a grid. It'll look more like a fishing net, and we want it to be like a grid. I am now almost drawing my grid, but now I got to do the sides. I got to do the right side and the left side, but I do the same thing. I make sure that my inch starts at the start of the paper, and then I just go down and making sure that each one of my little lowercase l's is 1 inch away from each other. You can kind of see I use the ruler. Those little lines on the rulers and those little numbers, I'm putting them right next to it. So I just go right down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now this is 9 inches long, and so you're going to be putting 9 little marks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way to 9. And you don't need to do the top or the bottom. Now, same thing, you connect the dots, and then I will have my grid. Now, I am drawing very lightly because I'm going to need to erase this grid because I don't want to see all the lines. I just want to see a nice YouTube logo. So make sure you're drawing lightly. I'm not pressing down super hard on my pencil. Nice and light so you can erase later. Because I finished my grid, I can now go on to drawing the YouTube logo. And this is where the grid is going to help me. I'm going to count down. The first 3 squares are basically empty on the top, except you see a little bit of the Y in that 3rd square right there. You see just the top of it, and then it goes down to the 4th square right where the first row meets the 2nd row. And so what I'm doing is I'm basically just drawing what I see in each one of those squares. So if a square is empty, I leave it empty. And most of these squares basically have just like a little shape inside each one of them. One of them might be like kind of like a rectangle shape that's like slanted. Sometimes it's a rectangle going straight down. Sometimes it's a curved line. But for a lot of this, a lot of it is just straight up rectangles going down. There's a couple slants, a couple curves, but overall, a lot of these letters, all right, are long rectangles, either going up and down and left and right. And what I'm doing is I'm using the grid to show me where to put them, like how far close to the line. This helps me with my proportions. Proportions are the sizes being the right size compared to other sizes. Alright, so like if you were drawing like a person and you drew their hands too big or their head too big, those proportions would be off. We know our brains, we know how big things should be, and so when things aren't drawn the right scale and the proportions are off, it sends up some red flags in your brain saying, hey, that's not the right size. So this grid will help us. So you gotta make sure you're counting the squares, make sure you're putting the right lines in them. So watch how I'm doing it, and then what you're going to want to do is then rewind it back to where I put up that YouTube picture with the grid on it, nice and big on your screen, and you're going to start counting those squares, and then each square that you see, you're going to draw what you see in that square. So don't think of it as drawing a YouTube logo. Think of it as a bunch of little drawings and a bunch of little squares, and you got to draw all the little squares, and then when you put it together, it's like a puzzle, and it comes together and makes the YouTube logo. So one square at a time. Take your time, draw lightly. We're going to have to erase some of this stuff. So this is the grid method. Alright, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed this video up because you've kind of seen how I made the Y, and I'm going to follow the same pattern. I'm going to go through each square, alright, and I'm looking what I see in the square and trying to draw the shapes that I see in each individual square. Remember, try not to think of it as you drawing an O. Think about what are the shapes that make up the O. What shapes do I see in the square? You gotta think kind of abstract. Look at that YouTube logo. It looks so good. That's because I used the grid. Alright, all my proportions are right, and that looks just like the YouTube logo that I got off my computer on the left, but I drew it by hand, alright? Using the grid method is such a great way of learning how to draw, how to make sure your proportions are all correct. Now, the only downside of using the grid is when you're done, you have to erase the grid. That's why drawing lightly is super important. So when I erase this grid, you don't see it no more, and then I can paint it and it'll look really fun and really cool. So get your eraser out. I'm also going to speed this up because this took me a couple minutes. I'm now going to move on to my favorite part, and that is coloring. Making my picture look beautiful. And for this, I'm going to be using oil pastels. Now, if you want to, you can color your picture however you like. Crowns, colored pencil, paint, marker. This is your logo. You draw it how you want. Actually, I'm going to do a little mixed media. I'm going to do a little oil pastel and then a little bit of paint because I love me some mixed media. Now, if you look over here on my YouTube logo on the left, U is one color, and then around the tube is another color. So I'm going to speed this up too, but I'm going to use oil pastels to color the YOU, and that's going to be one color. And you don't have to, and I wouldn't do the YouTube, the normal black and red. I don't think that's interesting. I'm going to do like pop art colors, kind of like Andy Warhol did. So I'm going to make this nice and fun. And what's really cool is when we do this in school and I have like a whole class of like 25 kids and they all make the same logo but in different colors, I can put them all right next to each other and it looks kind of like an Andy Warhol picture, which is really fun. It looks like I have a lot of white left all around the logo and inside where it says tube. So for this part, I'm going to use paint, and I think with the purple and the orange, I think blue would be a really good color to go with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a light blue watercolor, and I'm going to paint around my YouTube logo. And once again, I'm speeding this up, but you can see my pop art coming together, and it's starting to look really fun. And I think after it's done drying, it is ready for the refrigerator or a frame on my wall.
Well, kiddos, I hope you had fun making your pop art. Make sure that you keep practicing. Stay tuned to my channel because we're always making things here. And I will see you next time on Drawing with Trowbro.